So did the criminal justice system disappear at the end of the chain gang era? No, it evolved, it adapted, and it adapted again to the external conditions. We want to know what came next. At that moment, you look at the environment. What did the environment look like at that moment? This was the moment of the Black Freedom Empowerment Movement, right? This is in the late 1960s. Revolution was in the air. Candidate Richard Nixon's Southern strategy was to win the Southern states by telling white Southerners, almost all Democrats at that point, that black people are out to get them, and voting Republican is what will save you. Nixon said it in code. It wasn't a very complicated code. He said, I am for states' rights, I am for law and order. Okay. This was his Southern strategy, and it was successful. Law and order manifests as 3 strikes, mandatory minimums, war on drugs. The rate of incarceration, right? So the rate of incarceration had been flat for the past 100 years before that. Through the convict lease system, through peonage, through the chain gang system, through all the horrors of those systems, the rate of incarceration itself had been fairly flat. Until the 1970s, there was a sharp upturn because of the Southern strategy and the war on drugs. That's been climbing for the last 40 years. That's what we've been talking about during this conference. This is the creation of mass incarceration in the South. And as goes the South, so goes the nation. Manny Marable recognized the centrality of mass incarceration. We've talked about this and how capitalism underdeveloped Black America. And Michelle Alexander has drawn popular attention to it now with the new Jim Crow. So how long have we had mass incarceration? We are coming up on 40, 45 years. And because of the economic crisis, this is a crisis that was brought on in part by mass incarceration, states cannot afford to continue increasing their prison population. And so because of this economic crisis, but also because of the determined organizing of prison activists and abolitionists, after 45 years of shooting upwards, the rate of incarceration has flattened, and it is turning downward. And with Liberation Summer 2012 and the other efforts we have, history tells us that we are destined to succeed. But with the end of mass incarceration, will the criminal justice system disappear? No. It will evolve, and it will adapt. And what we need to understand, I think, at this moment is it is adapting. And it is adapting to the external conditions and to the environment that exists today. So if we want to see what this adaptation will be, what is this current evolution? Study the past if you would divine the future. And the past tells us, look at the environment. So let's look at the environment for some clues. You can come with me to Edgewood County, Alabama. It's a county in northeast Alabama, not quite rural, but a small town place. It first came into existence as a town, as a detention center for the Trail of Tears. Cherokees being forcibly deported out of their homeland passed through Edgewood County in Alabama. The town of Gadsden developed into a town and it built a jail. You can fast forward 100 years into the rise of mass incarceration, and it meant that by the late 1980s and the early 90s, the jail in Edgewood County was, like jails everywhere, terribly overcrowded. The Southern Center for Human-Rights, where I used to work, represented the men and women in that jail, sued it, and won the litigation. Now, watch this adaptation. This is what a system looks like when it is evolving. Watch this adaptation. The sheriff took his loss, and instead of fighting it, he took the federal consent order to the county commissioners and said, we're being forced to build a new jail. Build me a much, much, much larger jail than the one I had. He got his much larger jail, and he got a contract to lease out those beds to what was then the INS and is now ICE. And Edgewood County is now one of the largest immigrant detention centers in the South, holding people who are being forcibly deported, the way the Cherokee Indians were forcibly deported. That's one clue on how the criminal justice system will evolve past mass incarceration. And another clue, we can go to Arizona, to Maricopa County. There, Sheriff Joe Arpaio faced overcrowding in his jail, brought on by mass incarceration, brought on by his policies. He responded by setting up tent city, outdoors, in the heat, which he himself described as a concentration camp. He responded by bringing back the chain gang. And with when these stunts stopped bringing him attention, who did he go after? He went after immigrants, Latino day laborers in particular. And Arizona's anti-immigrant SB 1070 that was just debated in front of the Supreme Court last week, it's a state law putting into place the practices that Sheriff Arpaio has been practicing for over 10 years. And what is that practice? It's the practice of using the apparatus, the existing apparatus of the criminal justice system, his deputies, his jails, his criminal code, to drive out immigrants. So we can look at some clues. We can suspect that the criminal justice system is going to make an adaptation. It's going to evolve, and that evolution is going to be about getting deeper and deeper enmeshed with immigration enforcement. Here in New York City, Linda is going to talk about the NYPD, FBI collaborations, and these other collaborations spying on the Muslim community in the name of anti-terrorism and national security. We don't have time today to do a full scan, but we can have some suspicions that the criminal justice system is going to get deeper and deeper embedded and enmeshed, not only with immigration enforcement, but also with national security. So, as we continue to agitate and litigate and organize to fight mass incarceration, we want to have one eye firmly just fixed on this thing that we're fighting, mass incarceration that we're fighting. But we also have to have one eye on what is evolving. There's this massive merger happening between the criminal justice system, immigration enforcement, and national security systems. And that's the bad news. There may be some good news here, too. The whole panel before, we've been to the plenary before, we're talking about how repression spawns resistance. And we might be able to talk today a little about what that resistance looks like. This is a system that is being set up, that is intentional, but works only if it splits us apart. But with the level of repression that exists, it may also be doing the work of pulling us together. I think we will leave that for what we can discuss, though. Thank you.
And that, as a beginning, has now resulted in over 3 million people being incarcerated in this country. And one of the, I think I'd like to go now to a very famous case that really exemplifies how the inequality, the double system of injustice in the United States is carried out. And the case that brings this clearly into focus is the infamous Central Park Jogger Case, which began on April 19th, 1989, when a young white investment banker was brutally attacked, beaten, and raped as she was jogging in Central Park. Within hours, police, fanning out throughout the entire of Central Park and the surrounds, had picked up some 50 Black and Latino youth on suspicion of this heinous crime. Ultimately, 5 young men, aged 14 to 17, were charged with this. This despite the fact that there was no physical evidence at all linking them to the crime. They are Corey Weiss, he was 16 years old at the time, and he did 14 years in jail, and this is Corey right here. Raymond Santana, who was a 14-year-old honor student at the time, and he did 6.5 years, and he is here with us also today. Yusef Salaam, beloved by his entire community and all of his young siblings and cousins who surrounded him at the trial, he did over 5 years. And Kevin Richardson, he did over 5 years. Antoine McCrae, over 6 years. The victim was found unconscious in mud. She lost 75% of her life's blood. But none of these 5 youth had any mud or blood on their clothing, on their hands, anywhere on their body, under their nails, nothing. She had 2 specimens of semen in her body. Not one of those 5 young men matched the sperm. But the police had confessions from 4 of those 5 scared kids. And along with an eager, racist media hype, and I can name some journalists that I'd like to see never write another word of journalism, even though they said the confessions were coerced, because of course these kids were interrogated without parents or lawyers. They were convicted, and they were sent to jail. And it wasn't until 2002 that this case was overturned, and then they had to get rid of Megan's Law. And this is how, just a blatant example of how the injustice system works, especially in America's urban centers. And so I'd like to bring up now King Downing. He is with the Campaign to End the New Jim Crow. But before he comes up, I would like to just hear from Corey and Raymond first. They have some statements that they'd like to give.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, especially on the topic of mass incarceration. For everybody who knows the case, we were examples. We became a product of that. This case made society look at juveniles in a different light. It changed the sentencing laws. Dealing with mass incarceration, going to prison was very hard for us. Even though we were young, a lot of things went over our head, but we didn't know what was headed coming in our direction. We didn't know that we was going to be away from our families. We were going to have to adapt to prison life. We lost those youthful years of what you learn when you become a man. That's shown from your family, your father, your uncles, your older brothers. We lost that. And that became replaced with prison life. Going back to mass incarceration, I served six years, 8 months for a crime that I did not commit. And within that time, I said, I gotta become a better person. I knew I was innocent, but I have to show the world that I'm not who they say I am. I'm not this monster. I'm not this rapist. We're not a wolf pack. And within my incarceration, I went on and achieved the GED. I went on and got an associate's degree before Pataki did away with the college program. And so I thought, returning back to society, everything was going to be all right. I didn't know that I had to register as a sex offender. I didn't know that coming back out to society, people were going to look at me different and shun away from me. I didn't want to be around kids because I just felt like somebody was going to point a finger and say, you did something to my child? I didn't want to deal with that. And then also all the tools that I brought, and then what I brought back with me was prison life, because now I have grown, and those values that I was supposed to learn from my dad, I learned from being in prison. So now when I came back out into society and I tried to function, I couldn't, because now I had this aggressive nature with me. I had this aggressive attitude, and I had to wash my boxes in the shower, and I had a small room that I used to love to be in it. And my dad would say, why can't you come out and watch TV like normal people? And I was like, no, I like being in here. This is great for me, because it was that solitude. I couldn't be in a big room with a lot of people. And I didn't realize this, but this all came from prison. This is what I brought back with me. So I went in as a 14-year-old kid and came back as a 21-year-old, almost like a polished criminal. And so it became hard. I couldn't adjust. I filled out numerous applications, didn't work. And I said, well, should I go back to school? But I needed a job. And I couldn't understand why would nobody hire me. And then it hit me. You're a convicted sex offender. This is one of the most heinous crimes in New York City's history. And I gave up. And this is what prison life did to me. It made me give up. I didn't care anymore. I walked around like I didn't have nothing. I didn't have a care in the world. I said, you know what? From now on, this is how I'm going to my grave. I'm going to my grave as Raymond Santana. Central Park Jogger, rapist, monster. And so, because I lost the ability to be productive and connect, I went back into a life of crime, and I started selling drugs because I thought that was the only outlet that I had to be successful. And then, you know what happens after that? That doesn't work too long. And my house got raided. I went back to prison, and they gave me a 3.5 to 7 year sentence. But this time I was guilty. So I dealt with it, and I said, this is what it is. I made my bed, I gotta lay in it. But I guess God had other plans for me. Because as we know, in 2001, Ted Reyes came forward, and he confessed to the crime. And we went back and forth within that next year with the DA's office investigating the case, because they didn't believe Reyes. And it wasn't just that. Reyes went on to write letters. He wrote several people and told them that he was innocent, and they still didn't believe him. It wasn't until that DNA evidence came back and it matched, because he left DNA in 2 areas, inside the victim and on site. And then as they went back and they reinvestigated the case, and then they found out all the stuff Reyes did was correct. Everything matched. But they still didn't believe him a little bit. So they said, well, you know what, Mr. Reyes, what makes you so credible? And Mr. Reyes went on and said, I'm going to solve 4 unsolved cases for me. And he went on to do that. This guy was known as the East Side Slasher. And the same police officers that handled that investigation are the same ones that handled ours. So they knew they had this guy the whole time, but they said, you know what, since we have these 5 Black and Latino kids, and because the media has put over 400 news articles in the first 2 weeks, how do you dissect a 14-year-old kid's life in 2 weeks? We didn't even do anything yet. And so it made a lot of people turn their back on us. And when Reyes came forward, even I was in denial. This is how much the institution was embedded in me, that I was even in denial, that I said, you know what, some way, somehow, they're gonna pin this and say Reyes was the 6th or 7th man, and they're gonna sweep it under the rug, and I'm gonna still live with this label all my life. And it took several months for my lawyer to say, don't worry about it, we're gonna get into it. And I said, look, I don't even wanna hear that. I already know what's gonna happen here, because this is how bad the justice system had broke me already. And it wasn't until 2002, December, that I started to believe, once we got exonerated. And that became a solution. The solution was that once you're able to get the criminal justice system off your back, it gives you room to breathe. It gives you room to make some kind of move and become productive in society. But a lot of our brothers don't get that chance because the system stays on their back. It keeps them trapped. Most of our brothers are on parole or probation. And then the stipulations on that is ridiculous. A guy is 37 years old and he has to be home by 7 o'clock. That's crazy. And so because Reyes came forward, we were able to, try to pick up the pieces and move on with our lives. And even daily it's a struggle. It's a struggle. As you all know, we're in litigation right now, and the city still says that we're guilty. The city still says that some way, somehow, either Reyes went first or we went first, even though no DNA evidence matches any of us. And this is a case that, where you had fingerprints, footprints, you had clothing, you had blood, hair samples, and when you can take all these different forms of evidence and nothing matches, when do we get it? When do we get it? And the only part that we see that comes to that can help us come to a resolution is you guys. You guys, for the constant support, for the acknowledgement, for always speaking on our case and letting our youth know that this is what happened to us can happen to them, and we definitely gladly appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening, people. Hope y'all notice what I'm about to say. No justice.
No peace.
No justice.
No peace.
What do we want?
Justice.
What do we want?
Justice.
What do we want?
Justice.
When do we want it?
Now.
When do we want it?
Now.
When do we want it?
Now.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Corey-wise, as you already know, such as my brother here, Raymond, Mr. Santana, as he already said, we went through hell. We went through hell. Wow. We went through hell. We thank the public, we thank America, we thank y'all, which is a part of America, for your strength, for your prayers. For those that believe, thank you. Thank you for your energy. We need your energy. Since we're trying to write us off. But we're here making it happen after all these years. So as we look at the babies today who don't know, try to anticipate on being a strong example to them for your children as well as our children. I want to go. Thank you everybody.
And King Downing, as I said before, is a member of the Campaign to End the New Jim Crow and also an attorney and an activist in police brutality issues and many others. And King, you have the floor.
I have the floor. Thank you. Give it a hand for Sarah Brown. We're going to be She's still holding it down. So check out the news and where we live where you get the latest information on the people who tried to prevent these kind of circumstances from happening a generation ago. Our political prisoners and prisoners of war. So tune into that program. I wanted to take a little bit of time just to do an intro, and then I'm going to have a conversation with these two brothers. And I would just like you all to just stand and recognize them, please. Recognize who they are and what they're doing. Sally gave a lot of the background of the case, but one of the things that I'm hoping will come out of this is what it was that Corey just gave everybody credit for, was the fact that from what they're saying, it was the support of people out here that helped them be able to cope. So I just want to see a show of hands of anybody who was active during that time period on behalf of the Central Park case, in whatever way you define that. Where are the veterans of the Central Park Jogger case? Where are my Central Park 5? Give yourselves a round of applause. Because, you know, we go from the Central Park 5, then we go to the Gina 6, you know, and you're not going to have these numbers keep going on, up and up. So, and the last part of it is that my reason for coming here is not to share any more information. We had other people from the campaign in the New Jim Crow. A lot of information got shared. Juan Victoria Stokely Carmichael said this 35 years ago, and it is as true then as it is now. We are past the time for description. The time is now for, go ahead, say it again. The time is now for prescription. Did anybody here who came here today learn some information today that they weren't able to take action, except that they learned something today, so now they can take action? Or did you already know what you needed to know to take action? How many already knew what they needed to know to take action? Not too many. Okay. Well, the fact is, you already know more than you need to take action. So I'm hoping the conversation will be, what can we do about this case, which is still outstanding after all these years, the city dragging their feet, and what to do about all the other cases that keep racking up as fast as we can. So we've learned some things that we didn't know before. We learned about the extent of mass incarceration. thanks to Michelle Alexander's book and other people like Angela Davis who have been talking about this for a long, long time. We also learned, I made a whole list here, we also learned the extent to which their targeting was part of racial profiling. And the stop and frisk information that wasn't known back then is now fully documented, 6,000 cities, 25 states across the country, that what was going on with them was racial profiling, and the word wasn't even a household word back then. We've also learned that when it comes to targeting that whole massive campaign against young black men for selling drugs, the SAMHSA statistics, which I heard Jazz repeating when I first came in, showing that whites use and sell drugs in this country at the same rate as blacks do, then why are we 70% of the people incarcerated? So now we have that documentation. We didn't have it before. We also know that the government was complicit in the bringing of drugs into this country. And so we have books like Dark Alliance by Gary Webb, which we didn't have at that time, documenting the way the intelligence agencies were bringing drugs into the urban areas in order to support illegal wars against countries that they had disagreements with. We also learned that this situation had been going on since World War II by reading The Politics of Heroin by Alfred McCoy, which documents decade after decade of intelligence agencies importing drugs from other countries into the U.S. and causing drug problems with our communities and then rounding up our youth, including Raymond's own admission after coming out of prison for this problem. So we learned all about that. The last thing that we learned is an organization I want you to look up called ALEC, American Legislative Executive Council. The entire war that came about as a result of all of the hype around the Central Park case led to the forming of juvenile incarceration and get tough laws and three-strike laws and zero tolerance laws that were all being put forward by the American Legislative Executive Council, who were pushing these laws on legislators everywhere at the behest of who? Guess who it was that was paying for all that? The private prison corporation. So all of these small-time politicians were saying they're just trying to get elected. No, it was the private prison companies who were pushing this agenda back there in the 90s in order, so now we have a huge prison industrial complex with private prisons. So that's the backdrop of all of this. And then I hope we'll have a conversation about what we're going to do about it in the Q&A. So I wanted to have a chance to ask you all questions, and I wanted to ask Corey. We don't a lot of times get the stories of what it's like day to day inside. And so if you could share anything about what that experience was like to give people here a sense of what it's like.
What, on that side?
Yes.
Belly of the beast. That's what it is. It's the belly of the beast. It's just dealing with, especially when you're dealing with a high-profile case, white woman raped, inner city kids. They looking to be lynched. That's all it is. It's really, the situation like that basically is really what you call death row. I'm a death row inmate. That's what it really is. And that just step over my head.
And is there any particular story that you can share?
Like,
You know, something that happens, like one story, because you say you're in the belly of the beast, you know, it's lynching and all that, but is there any one particular thing that happened?
it just, when you're dealing with an adult prison, with a hideous crime over your head, don't know whether you're gonna be alive, you don't know if whatever's going to happen to you in the next second. But when you're dealing with a situation like this, you have to follow corrections, which can be considered who claims. And they feel that you're dealing with their people. So the only only thing they want to do is just terrorize you by all means necessary. Malcolm X words. They cut your lights off, cut your waters off, spit in your food, just piss on you if they could. They have their own little particular inmates that they want to sick with their dogs. They want to sick on you, for a few minutes of fame. So I got touched. I felt the vibe and intention of all of that, all of it. But like I said, when they want to hurt you, when the Department of Correction want to hurt you, aka Ku Klux Klan, when they want to hurt you, because of that, they aim at you. They aim at you. They look to abuse you to the core. It just mental torture. Being terrorized by Department of Correction. Correction. They ain't trying to correct. They ain't correcting nothing. But yeah.
Well, thank you for that.
Hope I answered the question.
You way more than answered. As soon as he said Belly and the Beast, I had my answer. Okay, Raymond, same question.
When you enter the system, you don't know what to expect. So that's number one. That caution. And us being 14, 15, 16-year-old kids, you have to make a decision really quick. And that decision is, are you going to survive or are you going to become a victim? And we've victimized once already. But now the case was more mental, a little bit physical, but now this was all physical first. So you have to really make a decision, and I'm talking as soon as you walk in the door, and that's a lot to put on a 14-year-old kid. And once you make that decision, then you have to live it out. So now you start to adapt their rules, their way of living, and you just think that it's temporary. But when you serve 5 and 6, 7 years, it becomes permanent, and that's the outcome.
Thank you for that. And what kind of programs or opportunities, if any, were in there that were designed to prepare you for the eventual time when you would be released if we start recording? What programs, if any, were there to prepare you for that time?
You have your schooling that the tacky took out. You have your schooling. You have your pre-release, whatever type of program that you can rehabilitate yourself. That's what they didn't have, but you have to create your own. The state don't give you nothing. Absolutely nothing. So you have to create your own. You and your brother, you have to create your own paperwork, so the parole board can see it, although they don't recognize it, but you have to create your own to the best of your ability. The state don't see it, they see what they want to see, but when you have that stick over your head, they don't see nothing. Because it's all about pleading, it's all about pleading guilty to it. Killing your future up here. So that was all it was. So to your question, like I just said, to prepare you, it's nothing to prepare you. You have to prepare yourself. It's yourself.
Yeah, like Corey said, when I got there, they had a GED program. I was able to obtain that. They had a college program. I was able to graduate right before the tax took it. And besides that, they had a bunch of vocational programs. And I look back back at that now, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. You know, it's nothing wrong with vocational programs, but you're limiting me. You're limited. You don't want me to progress past that. You know, like a labor job. And another point that Corey hit on was it became more self-education because you knew you wasn't going to get far. Like once I finished an associate's degree, they didn't have enough for me to do. So what was I to do? So I started reading books. You know, Malcolm X, Howard Zinn. I read a bunch of books, and for me, that's when things started to click. When I started reading books, and it started to click on what happened to us. You know, because pretty much because I was still young, so a lot of it went over my head. I didn't get bailed out. So I never got to see the magnitude of the media and the people protesting outside, and I thank you for that. I never actually got to experience that. So my education came from books.
Thank you. And back to Corey, and this could be the last one, so I don't know what the time frame for this part was. Were you aware of the movements that were going on outside in your support? And if so, how did you know?
What's up?
No, all right. They want to hear from both of you.
I'm sorry. Well, I saw very behind the wall, you were allowed to have a television in your cell. You had to buy it. But I was seeing programs, talk show, a few Donahue before they took them off. Old school, huh? And I saw a few people on talk shows talking about the case. Other than that, that was my only outlet of knowing what was going on. But recently, there's God bless the Byrne family. Recently, they finished working on a program on us. But as I found myself looking at this documentary, looking at when I was a kid, and now, I said, wow. Now I see, wow. I see such a blind man. Now I see, as I look at other people's eyes looking at me, now I see what they're looking at. They're looking at history. History is still alive. History made his business to stay alive. Or praise be to the Most High. So as I'm looking at it, looking at all this, I would call it hellfire. As I'm looking at it, I said, wow. And just hearing different people's state of mind on it, on where they went wrong at. And where the city went wrong at. All they want to do is get a guilty verdict. So the city, New York City, just failed their children of New York.
Thanks for that.
And as I look at this, as I look at it, and verdict, and Mateus, and so forth coming through, all I can really say is to my counterpart here, and the rest of my family, my built family, we have work to do. We have work to do, from my own observation from this program. We have work to do, and these people here feel that they got over, but they took lives and ruined it. They ruined their child's New York's life.
Well, let's leave it there, because I want to give Raymond a chance. No, but I appreciate it, because you said the whole point of this is we have work to do. That's the main thing we want to take from this. Remember, This case has been dragging on all this time, and the city knows they are not guilty, but the city does not want to reveal its own guilt and put this to rest once and for all. But if they keep waiting, they're going to wait until Occupy, and where are the members of the Occupy Wall Street Prison Solidarity Committee? Are any of the members here? Any of them here? Well, they were here earlier. If this case doesn't move forward before Occupy and Occupy Prison Solidarity comes along, they're going to wish they had settled this case when things were nice and quiet, because you all are going to get busy. So I'm sorry, Raymond.
I just wanted to say real quick that as far as the programs, because I was inside, and I come from a big family, and I came from a point where most of my family members kind of shunned me away because they thought I was guilty. And the only person they could see was my dad. My mom was sick, so she passed when I was in prison. And I gotta always give this person, you know, props all the time. Bob Slade, 98.7 Kids, over the line. And the reason why I say that because they was one of the major forces that always supported us. And they would go on the radio and they would always talk about, you know, about our case, and they would always point out all the inconsistencies, and they always hit it on the head, and it gave me so much hope. You know, when I felt like the whole world was against us, and to hear our voice was so soothing, it was like that father figure, you know, taking up for his kid, and it was great. It was great.
And we'll also add that if he had turned down the dial a little bit to 99.5, he would have heard a lot from Sally O'Brien and WBI, and Sally, you were part of the support committee on behalf of them as well. So give them a round of applause. Please show some love, and also be active on behalf of their case.
And I'd just like to, I'd like to add one thing to that. There was a committee of mothers headed up by Nomsa Grath here in Harlem that included people like Rosemary Mealy, sisters from the Dominican sisters, Susanna and Sandra, Fiona Cruz, just a whole lot of mothers who did not believe at the time that these young men were guilty. I was privileged to be a part of that group and wrote articles in The Guardian for which I was called a white apologist. It was the last time I wrote for The Guardian, as a matter of fact. And we put it on WBAI and also in the City Sun. But I would like, if we have a moment just for one more question, I'd like to ask one more question. And just let people know that this case is not resolved because these young men have been compensated nothing. So far, nothing. So there's a lot of activism that still needs to happen around this case. And I would just like to ask if you can talk about it with the case still being unresolved as it is, and if you can't, that's fine. The confessions, the one thing that they used to say that you were guilty. What happened? How did you give those confessions?
Well, through the litigation, we can't go into detail as far as the confessions. But everybody in here has an understanding. We have an idea of what goes on in the precinct. So just magnify that times 30, and then you have our case. You know, plus we got to remember also that this is over 30 hours of interrogation. But through the litigation, we can't.
Okay. And of course, they were 14 to 17 years old at the time, interrogated without a lawyer or a parent present. So this case certainly gives an example of how there are several, not two, several standards of justice, just as in the United States. Something this country's Muslim population knows only too well. And since the September 11th, 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center, for many, again assisted by a sensationalist and racist mainstream media, Muslims have become synonymous in many mainstream people's minds as terrorists. And this has resulted in the detention of thousands, literally thousands, tens of thousands of Muslims, the separating of families, the criminalization of academics, professionals, and just ordinary working folk who, like the recent case in Boston you may have heard about. And Linda Sarsour is the National Advocacy Director for the National Network for Arab American Citizens. And Ms. Sarsour will speak about repression against Muslims and this unequal legal system.
Thank you for having me here. You spent a lot of time thanking us and thanking people in this room and people outside here, but I want to thank you for your strength and your perseverance and for being here and standing strong. Thank you so much. I'm usually not that emotional, but it's something I don't know. Okay. I'm so honored and humbled to be here today as part of this historic conference, remembering an iconic leader and scholar man in Marable. My name again is Linda Sarsour. I'm the National Advocacy Director at the National Network for Arab American Communities and locally serving here as the Executive Director at the Arab American Association of New York. More important than that is I'm a New Yorker, and I'm from Brooklyn, and I'm an American Muslim. Sometimes I wish I was invited to discuss fashion or music or some more uplifting topics. But unfortunately, even after 10 years since the tragic events of 9/11, I find myself discussing the continued erosion of the civil rights and civil liberties of the American Muslim community in the United States. A few weeks ago, the editorial page editor at the New York Times, Andrew Rosenthal, wrote that ever since the 9/11 attacks, the United States has created, quote, what's essentially a separate justice system for Muslims, end quote. He, as many have before him, observed that the United States has created a radically different and more oppressive set of laws, rules, and punishments for a class of people in the United States based on their religious affiliation. You would think that there would be more outrage by our fellow Americans, more protest, but I say maybe they just don't know. Targeting and racial profiling by law enforcement is illegal, and yes, there is an exception. And that exception is always under the guise of national security. Basically, law enforcement can violate the law and jump through loopholes in the name of your national security. The Department of Justice gives the power and authority to the FBI to conduct what they call initial threat assessments. An agent can, without predication, so basically you don't have to have done anything wrong, consider ethnicity, national origin, and religion to begin an initial threat assessment, which includes trailing and surveilling and spying on individuals and institutions. So what's really happening on the ground in the Muslim American community? I will tell you, it is shocking. I grew up in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and I attended John Jay High School. Had a great upbringing and never thought I would witness what I have after 9/11. Through my work at the Arab American Association, I have witnessed and heard firsthand accounts of families torn apart, men gone missing, picked up and disappeared into thin air for days, weeks, and months at a time. Today I will share with you how aggressive law enforcement tactics are playing out and terrorizing our community. Blanket surveillance by the New York Police Department. This, my friends, was not a revelation to our community by the Associated Press. This was a confirmation of what we have been saying and feeling for the past 10 years. What does the surveillance look like? It is in the form of technological surveillance and the use of informants who are representative of the communities they infiltrate. By the way, those NYPD security cameras are not in place to catch you running a red light, which is what my dad thought. I said, Dad, think again. They're more interested in you than you running a red light, which, by the way, you shouldn't be doing anyway. When it comes to informants, it is important to note that there are two types of informants, and most often we miss the second type. I'll start with the confidential informant. This type usually lays low, maybe takes notes, observes his surroundings, documents interesting things or things they perceive interesting, and reports back to a field agent or a supervisor. The Associated Press was able to share through leaked documents what that looks like. Reports that documented Muslim Student Association activity, what types of events they had, what speakers they invited, topics of discussion, trips they took, and how many times they prayed during those trips. They mapped businesses and mosques in the Northeast, documented who frequented those businesses and institutions and who owned them. Basically, the NYPD has documented the everyday lives of Muslims, where they ate, shopped, and prayed. These reports, which include individuals' names and institutions, are on file with the NYPD, just like I'm sure my talk is today. and I guarantee you that we have uninvited guests, and you've had many of them throughout this conference. The second type of informant is the informant who also plays the role of agent provocateur. This person is the rabble-rouser, infiltrates groups of people and incites hate and hateful rhetoric. He'll say things like, look what our government is doing, killing our sisters and brothers in Afghanistan, and they show you pictures of dead women and children, and follow it by saying, we need to do something about it. We must be careful around these provocateurs. The NYPD had a demographics unit, and this demographics unit focused on 29 ancestries of interest. 28 were Arab and or Muslim majority countries, and the 29th, get this, they created a special category for Black American Muslims. Listen, the American Muslim community has invited the NYPD and FBI into our mosques and institutions through our front doors. They're welcome to come listen to our sermons, meet our imams, whatever. What we don't want are the FBI and NYPD using agent provocateurs to manufacture terror plots and incite people to commit crimes when there was no criminal enterprise ongoing in these mosques and communities. The NYPD boasts the foiling of 14 plots. Let me give you a few examples, and I want you to formulate your own opinion and whether you think some of these were credible plots to begin with. I'm not a prosecutor, and I'm not placing a legal judgment on these cases. I'm merely a woman with a mind to think and have formulated my own opinions. In May of last year, 2 Arab young men were arrested on charges that they planned to bomb a synagogue to avenge what they saw as mistreatment of Muslims around the world. Ahmed Farhani, 27, who is mentally ill, has a criminal record, has a drug problem, was targeted. Farhani has been institutionalized over 20 times, and 10 out of those times by the NYPD themselves. Let's look at the case of the Newburgh 4. Ex-convicts, one was registered schizophrenic, one a crack addict, another ex-convict who had a dying brother. And he was told that he would get $30,000 to help pay for a liver transplant for his brother if he completed the plot. I'll share one more. Right after the American Muslim community this year held a rally to call out the NYPD on their domestic spying of our community, a day later, an emergency press conference was aired where Mayor Bloomberg and Commissioner Kelly revealed the arrest of a Dominican-American from Washington Heights convert to Islam, Jose Pimentel. Another mentally unstable male who once tried to circumcise himself, arrested at the home of the informant where they were found smoking weed together. In the case of the Newburgh 4, the informant actually bought the plastic bombs for the men to place under a car parked in front of a synagogue. What do these cases have in common? In each and every case, an informant was heavily involved in the creation of the plot. In the case of Pimentel, the FBI said that they did not get involved in that case because the informant was, quote, too involved. Also, Pimentel brings up another important point to think about. He did not fit an ancestry of interest, and he didn't live in a Muslim community, which negates the point of having a demographics unit that focuses on specific ancestries of interest that Pimentel, for example, didn't fit into. The constant government surveillance, infiltration, and use of informants, many who are paid large sums of money by the FBI and local law enforcement, and who themselves most often have criminal records, create increased levels of fear, anxiety, and paranoia in American Muslim communities. Muslims and American Muslims are petrified to experience this, quote, separate justice system for Muslims. Special detention centers for Muslims, Guantanamo Bay, and a network of secret CIA lockups, now said to be closed, where prisoners were almost routinely tortured. Special trial procedures for Muslim prisoners, military tribunals. In 2006, the U.S. Bureau of Prisons secretly created Communications Management Units, CMUs, to isolate certain prisoners from the rest of the prison population and the outside world. CMUs feature solitary confinement, they limit visits from friends and family, even minor children, restrict phone calls, and provide no work and educational opportunities provided to other federal inmates. Prisoners do not need to pose a flight risk or security threat, or even have any in-prison disciplinary problems to be sent to a CMU. By design and fact, the Bureau of Prisons created CMUs to specifically monitor the communication of Muslim, Middle Eastern, and other inmates tagged as threats and isolate them from supporters, friends, families, and the media. At the 2 CMUs in operation in Terre Haute, Indiana, and Marion, Illinois, approximately 2/3 of prisoners are Muslims, an overrepresentation of the federal prison population by more than 1,000%. Fahid Hashmi, a former student at Brooklyn College, spent 3 years in pre-trial solitary confinement, 23 hours a day. In these cases, to make matters even more complicated and unjust, the use of secret evidence, where basically you can be charged based on evidence that is secret, convicted without seeing the proof against you because government says it may compromise our national security. And most recently, with the passing of the National Defense Authorization Act, even American citizens are not exempt. Now, why is the American Muslim community losing the polls of public opinion? It's easy. Our issue has been framed in a way where one must choose between their personal safety and the protection of the civil rights of one group of Americans. Personal safety trumps individual rights any day. In the past 10 years, American Muslims have been forced to suffer in an incredibly hostile civic environment in which prominent elected officials, religious leaders, and political news commentators have expressed outrageous, hateful sentiments towards Muslims and their beliefs. Some prominent influential leaders have launched sustained campaigns to marginalize American Muslims and deny them protections guaranteed by the Bill of Rights preserved in our Constitution. But the Muslim community didn't wake up one morning and say, wow, the police have gone bad at messing with our community. We need to do something about it. It's not how it happened. We know from history that the chief bodyguard of Malcolm X, G. Roberts, was an NYPD undercover agent. And after the assassination of Malcolm X, he advanced his career and transferred to the FBI as an undercover agent. And that's where he infiltrated the Black Panther Party. And we have seen the impact of local law enforcement tactics in communities of color, not under the guise of the war on terror, but under the guise of the war on drugs. We know that the NYPD continues to stop and frisk young Black and Latino men for walking while Black and Latino. And we know that stop and frisk is a pipeline to mass incarceration. As crime rates go down nationally, incarceration rates are still increasing, making the United States home to the largest prison population in the world. With all that said, I'm hopeful. And these types of conferences make me hopeful. And we need to connect the dots between heavy-handed immigration enforcement, mass incarceration of people of color, and racism and bigotry that our communities face. And we need to join forces, bring movements together, and bring justice back to our people. I dedicate my talk today to Troy Davis, and to Raymond Santana, and to Corey Wise. Men denied justice by our system, and it is in their memory and the many countless and nameless others that I will continue to build allies, continue the movement, and struggle for justice. My children deserve better. Our children deserve better. Our children deserve to feel safe and to be deemed innocent until proven guilty, not suspect based on the color of their skin or the faith they follow. I extend myself to you here, my fellow panelists, as a soldier in your army. Let's fight this fight together, and thank you for having me.
Okay, and thank you very much. Just all of our panelists have been so outstanding, and well, and I'd just like to say that Linda touched on the Defense Authorization Act signed by Obama into law at the beginning of the year. And for those of you who may not know, although I think this audience probably knows pretty well, it allows for preventive detention, no charges, no need for a lawyer. You just disappear, like many Muslims here and abroad are experiencing right now. And so we do have about 20, 25 minutes around there for questions from the audience for our panelists. And so why don't we just begin that process now?
Hello, I want to thank all of you for sharing your time with us. Your experiences are so powerful, I can't even describe it. I have a 13-year-old son myself, and I really regret not bringing him with me to hear this. I am a single mother, and I am really interested. I speak the truth to my son and prepare him the best that I can, but he is just a young child, and as you young men have experienced firsthand, I would like to hear your feedback on how to best communicate to a child of color to prepare him for what may hit him I really don't know how to speak to my son and have this impact him, you know? So I don't know if you guys, from your experience, can give me any feedback on how to address, you know, what's at hand.
For me, you know, my experience, because I have a daughter, and I always tell her, I say, I'm not your friend, I'm your parent. And numerous friends of mine who are single mothers and they deal with teenage boys, I always tell them, stay on his butt. You know, keep that foot on him, because as soon as you let him, you give him some leeway, anything's possible. That's all it takes is that one incident for him to go outside and something happens, or for him to be around the wrong crowd and something happens. So you gotta always remain that parent. Always stay in his business. Always stay on him, because at the end of the day, he'll appreciate it when he gets older. You know, my dad was a little lenient, and so he, you know, the noose, you know, the rope was a little loose. So I was able to run around. But as I got older, I wish that he would have pulled back more. So my advice to him is to stay on him, stay a parent, and keep doing what you're doing. I commend you for, you know, for being a single woman and taking care of your son. It's beautiful. Stay on him.
No. If you're familiar with the 80s, keep that. Keep that. Don't be illusioned by ACS. Keep that. You his parent, not them. You brought him here, not them. Police, you brought him here, not them. Stay on it. Boot behind. Stay on it.
I have one more part of this for you, sister, and that is that it's never too young to begin to learn what your rights are and teach a 13-year-old what his or her rights are. And so you'll see out of the information table, there's a lot of information about the campaign to end the new Jim Crow, but also this book that tells you what your rights are called Your Right to Remain Silent. You should come and get this one. So you asked the question, so you shouldn't have to walk all the way back there yourself, you know. But that's an important part of it, and I can say that Ossie Davis told a story about when he turned just about a little younger than your son, the police picked him up, drove him around, they poured maple syrup on his head, and then they gave him a dime, and then they let him go, and they were laughing. And what he believed was happening was it was a rite of passage to say, you're no longer a child, we're now watching you. And so that's what they did. And it also used to happen in Montclair, where they had a betting pool to see who would be the first person to arrest a juvenile once they became an adult. They had a betting pool. So prepare him or her, okay?
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for being able to speak about such a horrendous experience with love and grace and smiles. I wanted to thank Kunli for your words around describing the adaptation and high resilience of systems, because I never thought about it that way. And I didn't know that systems could have as much resilience as people. It seems simple when you say it, but I couldn't even conceptualize that before. So I will read everything differently now. The other thing is, I really just came to hear you and see you because I was in high school when that case happened, and I will never forget the Daily News the next day of teenagers wilding around the park, and how wilding became your wilding, the slang term, and that I've used it so many times. And I realized that each time I said it into adulthood, like I'm 40, like each time I said it, it's like an energetic condemnation of kids who I never knew, who are now like grown men, and it's like to see you really in flesh and blood, and not as a ink and not as a newspaper story. It's just really a testimony to what I need to do, even when I think I'm being such a good activist. All right, so thank you.
My understanding is that all of you had different attorneys when you actually went to trial, and that Alton Maddox was the attorney for one of the individuals who I believe did not actually, he was not the thing. Could you tell me, for example, what is the legal reason for why the city is refusing reparations, I guess is as good a word as any, and whether or not Donald Trump has in any way made any kind of contribution before the vile publication that he put in the New York Times asking for the death penalty for you joggers.
Yusef in the building.
Let me just say that Yusef Salaam, who was also one of the young men who went to jail falsely, is also here.
As far as Trump, no, he never apologized or acknowledged us. Now your first part was, what was your first part again? Or the legal. As far as the city's concerned, because they still think that we're guilty, so they said they're going to fight it. But when it comes to the city, they like to use these tactics, you know, because right now we're going through depositions. And so what they want to do is they go back on our family members, because our history, you know, we were young then. I was 14 years old, so you can't go back too much on me. But my father, you know, who's in his 60s, you can go back 25 years on him. And so now what they wanted to do is they wanted to sign all these releases where they want to look into his history. How many doctors he has seen in the last 25 years? Has he ever been on SSI, Social Security? Has he ever even took comp because he worked for over 40-something years? So this is the tactic that they use against our family members, because they can go back that far on them, which prolongs the process. And this is part of their strategy. You know, in the process, they hope something happens to us, or you know, we get caught up in something where they can say, "See, we told you," and this is what they're doing to us now.
Can we, since Corey kind of missed, can you guys pass that Corey? Everybody has made a statement, so I think we'd like to give you an opportunity to say something you would like to say.
We're just, if you just give us a moment, I know the question is, but Yusef has to give a statement as well.
First of all, I would like to thank everybody for having me and for having us. You know, I always feel like coming before people and speaking about our experience is therapeutic. You know, because they never, as much as said, "I'm sorry for putting us through this," and it was hell. I mean, some of us lost parents, family members. Some people, most people turned their backs on us. You know. And, you know, it's amazing because I was thinking about this the other day. When we were going through this process in 1989, for those of us that were out on bail, our faces was on every single newspaper. They kept it present in front of everyone, you know. And then all of a sudden, I don't know if Corey said that, I just need to back and say this for a second. Corey and I were coming back to my apartment, because me and Corey was best friends, still are. And Corey and I were coming back to my apartment because earlier on that day we heard that they were looking for us. They were looking for people. You know, we came back home and there was no young person outside. You know, and for that to be a reality in 1989 is crazy. You know. So I said to Corey, I said, "Man, well, I didn't do anything. You know, did you do something?" and say we didn't do nothing, and they won't believe us, we won't be all right.
Where's that Know Your Rights book?
You know? Exactly. But, you know, my stance was, I didn't want my mother to find out that the police had, you know, so, you know, we felt like we were adults anyway at 14 and 15, you know. We was, you know, up there. And we rounded the corner on the 21st floor, and the police officer was standing in front of my apartment talking to my brother, presumably to even see if they could vindicate him. And they asked me who I was. Now, I stood about this height at 15 years old, you know, and I said, well, I'm Yusef Salaam. They said, oh, this is one right here. They said, who are you? He said, I'm Kari Wise. Well, his name ain't on the list. You want to come down to the precinct, you know, with your buddy? You know, y'all should be all right. You know. I came home 7 years later. He came home almost 13 years later. You know, and when we were ultimately vindicated, it was on probably page 18 of every newspaper. Most folks who know about the Central Park 5, they feel like, or they think that the reason why we're out here and we're free is because of a technicality. Where the reality of the situation is, these folks who put forth an assault against us and our families, we gotta remember, the police department, the detectives, this is the homicide group that went after us. These people are trained in the sophisticated art of not only recreating crime scenes, but I mean, we see what we see on TV. I tell people all the time, that's about 50% of the reality of what really goes on, you know. These people knew we didn't do it. Corey saying all kind of crazy stuff, Raymond saying crazy stuff. Everybody was saying crazy stuff because it was a crazy situation and we wanted to get out of it, you know. And they promised most of us that, you know, we don't really want you, we just want your boy, because we know you a good guy and he ain't, you know. So I thank you, you know, for inviting us out and offering us a therapeutic session. That being said, I'm not sure if I touched on this whole forum, but I want to share with you a few things that happened to me in prison that I think helped me. It kind of saved my life. One was a poem that I came across, and it simply said, prison life in many ways can be likened to the womb. If the life inside becomes stillborn, the womb becomes the tomb. And my experience was just so different. I had old timers. I mean, they sent me from a youth facility, a maximum security youth facility, one of the three, to Clinton down the mall. Now, Corey had already been going to places like this, but this was my first time. That was my birthday gift, my 21st birthday gift. And what shocked me was that they gave us a number. My birthday is in February. My number was 95A1113. I'll never forget this number. And the number simply means that in 1995, in the first part of the year, I was the 1,113th person to enter through the doors. And I was innocent. Imagine how many others. But even though I was about, 5 miles from Canada, my experience was just so different. And it caused me to kind of go into a cocoon, a shell, you know, and think, process, understand, study. And I developed I used to want to be a rap artist, and I'm gonna leave you all with this. I wanted to be a rap artist, got cold feet after going to ASCAP Records and never turned in the paper. But while I was in prison, I started writing poems, succinct poems. And one of the poems that I want to share with you that came to me. It's called Venus and Mars. In between Venus and Mars is the center of our attraction. Of those connected to the stars, hardly a fraction. It behooves man to work for the day when this will all end. Life is mortal, so follow the way of those heaven sent. Awaken and receive that which will give you life, or remain horizontal and never begin the flight. For the solution, I'll descend from amongst the stars, and I'll meet you in between Venus and Mars. Thanks for having me.
And I have to say that Raymond Salaam, who is Yusef's mother, also played a major role in the committee to free all of these young men, and is still active today. So she's a wonderful, wonderful sister. Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Perhaps we should take maybe 2 questions in succession or 3 in succession, and then the answer, and then the final 2, and then
Okay.
in the interest of time.
Okay.
I also wanted to make a statement and ask a question. First of all, thank you so much for having this panel. It is humbling to meet everyone on the panel, especially the 3 young men who have served their lives due to an injustice. I'm honored to stand in front of you, and your testimony has been therapeutic for me. I'm a sex assault survivor, and I called a rape hotline a few months ago and expressed anger at the person who assaulted me, a Russian man, Jewish, on a date sex assault. The hotline called an attorney and had me arrested for terroristic threats, thrown in jail, incarcerated, and now they're still charging me potentially with a grand jury. I'm 45 years old. I'm a professional on Wall Street. I'm an aviator. I live in a white neighborhood, and I'm no different from you. And I remember 10 years ago, I remember Linda Fairstein. I took the female side. Men shouldn't rape, and they shouldn't rape. And what men shouldn't think that they should be able to get rape black women. And so there's an injustice all around when a black woman, her assailant, nothing happens to him, and he gave me 10 text messages, and many did it. But had he been black or Arab, or even possibly Asian, but mainly black or Hispanic, they would have locked him up. An actual sexual assault criminal. But nonetheless, I stand in front of you as someone who's been in jail wrongfully. I'm a victim. I think of myself as a survivor. And I was thrown in jail because on a hotline I said, yeah, I'd like that person dead. It's anger. If a sex assault victim will express anger, it's a hotline. It's the proper venue to express anger. And so I now see the other side. I wasn't there terribly long, or as long as you have, and in no way compared to what you've lost. But I've lost, and I now see the system that Michelle Alexander painted, the monster. It's there, it's steel, it's like the predator monster. It's very powerful, but it's invisible. And you don't see it, and it's multi-headed, and it's a hydra. And it's under the guise of, like she said, terroristic threats, homeland security, and everyday people allow it to happen because of this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon. Just to make this real quick, I want to comment. First, I just want to say thank you all. It was wonderful, wonderful presentations, especially with the history of mass incarceration from slavery, sharecropping, chain gang, so on. But I really want to say thank you to Sister Linda. You did an excellent presentation. representation than we would what it is. I'm from Detroit, and I used to work for CARE, so I kind of know of what's really going on. Yeah. Oh, hi, tell them I'm here. But I just wanted to, I guess, make in addition to, you were talking about the attack on Islam. In another workshop, they were talking about how media is attacking black people, black men. There's also an attack on Islam. And they're trying to make it like this foreign thing that just came out of nowhere. Whereas Islam has been here for centuries. A lot of those enslaved ancestors came over here, were Muslim. Even when some of the founding fathers owned copies of the Quran. So what they're doing is that they're trying to make it foreign so that, you know, the media or the American community would not see us as human, would not see us as American citizens, because we all work. I'm still paying taxes like everybody else. I'm paying outrageous student debt like everybody else. But because of the fact that I'm Muslim, I'm supposed to be different. And then add on to that, I'm a black woman, so now they're trying to make me separated, or either you're a black woman or you're a black Muslim, or actually it's all one thing. But I just wanted to say your presentation was great, and I just want to say thank you for, you know, just doing what you do, because I know it's a struggle.
Thank you. Let me just say we have 10 minutes left because they're going to lock this building completely and we won't be able to get out of it. So we have about 10 minutes left.
Talk about mass incarceration.
Well, I just want to say I'm really glad I came here tonight. I heard about this very last minute and I canceled all plans to be here. And I read Michelle Alexander's book, and but to actually hear the stories of what happened is, like, I can conceptualize the book, just to hear it is a totally different story, and I'm really thankful that you guys are here tonight. My question is directed to Linda. I'm part of the Students for Justice in Palestine and at Hunter College, and we're kind of like the militant extension of the Muslim Student Association, and a lot of the students in the MSA don't want to join Students for Justice in Palestine because they're already targeted, and if they become militant or political, they're just asking for it. So I was just wondering whether there were any concrete actions or campaigns you think that as Students for Justice in Palestine we could work with the MSA to end, not even end, just to work against the constant surveillance and the constant pressure that Muslim students feel in public everywhere.
First of all, thank you for that question. And the reason why I focused a lot around the Muslim Student Association and the surveillance by the NYPD is that that's where the political activity of our community starts. That's where you feed the next generation of young people to be out on the streets and work on our struggles and movements. And that's what this government is doing. That's what they're targeting, right? So our kids don't pay money or take student loans to be surveilled by the NYPD, but a concrete step is on May 12th, between 11 and 5 o'clock at the Brooklyn Marriott Hotel. We have created an opportunity for young students, young people, interested folks to come and learn more and talk to activists and young people to re-energize and reinvigorate and have people to listen to stories of folks who, families of folks whose children have been entrapped by law enforcement, to hear what activists have to say, because those are the people that I worry about. It's our next generation. If we can't get our young folks to organize, we're going to lose this fight. So I welcome you to come. It's you can look it up. It's on the Council on American Islamic Relations New York chapter. And they're having from 11 to 5 a student organizing kind of strategy session. So I welcome folks to come and join us there.
I heard another part of the question that you may have asked you, and it was, what it is that can be done about this. And I didn't come with all the books that I usually like to carry, just, because it would have been weighted down, but there's a couple more that I would like you all to take a look at. Those who have been working since the last generation know about the history. This is nothing new, what it is that these agencies are doing to people. All of these tactics were tested and tried and true, starting in the 20s and 30s with workers' rights movements and expanded all the way up through the Black nationalist, Black Power movement, Chicano, Puerto Rican rights movement, American Indian movement. And there are 3 books that I would like to name because the tactics do not change. They stay the same generation after generation. The first one is called The COINTELPRO Papers by Ward Churchill. The COINTELPRO Papers. describes what happens to these groups. A second book by Ward Churchill is called Agents of Repression, which focuses in on the organizations of color and what kinds of things were happening. And thank you for those two types of informants, because when you go back to that book, you see that they've been cranking this whole strategic plan and tactics for a long time. The most important one is a very small book called The War at Home by Brian Glick. It's a very small book because it talks about COINTELPRO and surveillance and what you can do about it. You have constitutional rights, and there are things that you can do to put these kinds of folks that she was talking about in check. The War at Home by Brian Glick. Learn that history, otherwise you're doomed to repeat the reaction to it, and they're doomed to continue to try the same tactics.
Go ahead.
Okay. My question is actually for the Central Park guys. The one thing that I noticed about you three guys, and I was actually kind of surprised about, I'm from New York and I read the newspaper, but you guys have remained so poised, so eloquent, so upstanding, given everything that you've been through. I just want to, I wanted to know, what are your words of wisdom for, say, people that, especially young black men, that we have a high rate of unemployment, high rate of miseducation in New York City. How come you're that way, as opposed to, you could be down, be depressed, like, what gets you guys moving forward?
Can we do the last two questions in succession, and then we'll have final?
Oh, I think that was a direct question. Yeah. Oh, okay, go ahead. Go ahead. And Dequi Keone Siddiqui is my co-host on WVAI, Where We Live, on Thursday nights at 8 p.m.
So I was coming up here to do some work, to invite any of you to be, we're going into fund drive for the month of May, but to invite you to come, because we do have to, as Sister Sophia Bukhari always says, pick up the work. And I just think that it's so important what each of you said, but to you brothers, it just reminds me that there's been a war on black people, brown people, since 1492, from the plantations to the slave ships to the genocide of indigenous people, and the lynchings, when you talked about the media, The Birth of a Nation, that movie that sparked the lynching, and the Scottsboro boys, and just one case after another, it just shows that it doesn't stop, that we have to continue to do the fighting. And the criminalization of black and brown people and people of color, from Japanese internment to all the Japanese Americans in the internment camp, they have criminalized all non-white people. And it is so important that people of color, black, brown, Asian, no matter the language, the religion, because they've criminalized religion, that we all do as you say, is unify and do the work. Because I love what you said, Brother Corey, that this city and we fail our children when we don't do the work, when we don't educate, when we don't fight back against this beast, this monster of a system that is intent on destroying us, because it's just a consolidation of their police state. So I thank each and every one of you for being up there with the succinct and powerful presentations that you've given. And please come to Where We Live, right? Because we need your voices.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you all of you for your inspiration. This is a question for Linda. Are there particular, in terms of concrete things activists should be doing, are there particular pieces of legislation or policies or things that activists should be, that you recommend we should be rallying around right now in terms of all the issues, anti-Muslim issues we're facing? That's my question.
On behalf of the coordinating committee of the Manning Marable Memorial Conference, I just want to thank all of you for an incredible session. We could not have imagined a better finale for the Manning Marable Memorial Conference. I just want to end, before I give it back to Sally and all of you, by saying that it appears that there is no better issue than mass incarceration and the criminalization generation of people of color and poor people in this country to unite so many of us from different walks of life. It appears that this issue of mass incarceration is the moral assignment of our generation. And it was incredible to hear Kung Lee's run-through of the history of mass incarceration in all of its forms. Linda Sarsour, you brought me to tears. And this is something that was raised at City College when you guys spoke. Our city owes you, I think that our city needs to put you guys on the road. I mean, you guys need to go to every single high school, every single church, every single institution in this city and speak your story. And I remember when I heard both Raymond and Corey, I'm of your generation. I was allowed to go off to college. I remember I asked Raymond, well, tell me about your college experience. Because you said you went to college. I didn't go to college. I did it inside. So I really think that people in this audience, we need to put them on the road. And we need to tell their stories. And someone in this room needs to take that task on. And what's amazing about this issue is that it humbles us and it speaks to our humanity and the humanity that this system has abandoned. So I just want to thank you on behalf of all of us. And I think we are moving in the direction of freedom, but we need to all get involved in that struggle. Thank you.
So we have two questions on the floor, and the first is going to Corey and Raymond and Yusef. So please answer the question.
He asked, how do we stay humble? I mean, we were humble from the get-go. We just was taken out of the situation, and we had no choice. But like Yusef said, it becomes therapeutic for us. To come out here and to speak and to tell our story. Because like I said before, a long time ago, I said, this is who I am, this is how I'm going out, and I'm going to handle it. But there's also now a positive aspect to it, where I'm able to give back, I'm able to talk to kids, I'm able to talk to people, and if our message reaches one person and saves one life, then our job is done. So this is why I do it, and this is why we also, we all do it.
I definitely echo that, it's funny, I was thinking about the comment about college. But, I live in a neighborhood where young people look like they are drawn to the fire, that fire of wanting to go to prison. And unfortunately, for us, having gone through something that we didn't do, and then going into prison and coming home, there's a lot of people that we know who did crimes. And when they come home, it's a badge of honor. You know what I'm saying? And I think that a lot of young people, they have this false impression that when they go to prison, they're going to be running to prison. This is my best boy right here. I met Raymond in prison. You know what I'm saying? And we all became family like that. I didn't see Corey till he came home. And these folks think that they're going to go to prison and they're going to run the joint. And they don't realize that there's a completely different plan that is designed to keep us in this same state. In terms of being humble, I think it's all about being wise to what's going on. Back in the days in the hip-hop songs, we had messages like, do you know what time it is? Tell me, do you know? Nowadays, the hip-hop songs are saying things like, toss it up, smack that, and I mean, it's I think about, I forget his Muslim name, but Loon. You know, I think about Moon and how Moon used to talk about how he would never go back to the hip hop world and how negative it was, you know, just this whole process of it all, you know. But to be able to be wide awake, to be able to be plugged in, to be able to understand on a different level is where it's at. And it's hard because it hurts when you see young people wanting to go to prison and you've been there. You know? I saw some young people throwing rocks into the County Cullen Library. And I stood there for a moment. And I was watching them. And they saw me. But they thought that I wasn't going to say anything. So I walked to the corner, walked across the street, and then came back around, you know. And a few of them ran, and a few of them stayed. And I'm watching this whole thing. And I says to the young folks, I say, you know, if the people inside get hurt, they call the cops. And all of y'all are going to prison. And one guy says, I didn't do anything. I said, you think the police are going to care whether you didn't do anything or not? You standing here on the corner with this foolishness. You know what I'm saying? You guys need to stop this. I mean, we all saw it. Things like people getting hit in the head with 40-ounce beer bottles and people running away thinking it was funny. That's attempted murder. That's definitely assault. But you sometimes don't realize this stuff until you become an adult. And you look back and you say, wow. You know. But here, I mean, we could have been real mad and angry, shot at the world, you know, and been right. You know what I'm saying? But to give back this way is better. You know?
I grew up off hip hop. Today, this 21st century, that's my way of life. Self-empowerment, self-improvement, all day, every day. So, when I look at today's youth, that's what I bring to them. I don't just speak it to the mic, I speak to their mind. That's all. Thank you.
And Linda, you have the last answer.
Thank you. When we originally started our recent campaign against the NYPD, we started with saying, you know, down with Commissioner Kelly and Deputy Paul Brown, right? But what we thought later is that it's not about one man or two men or 5 men, it's about a racist system that we need to change. So, to answer Maureen's question, early June we're working with the Progressive Caucus of the City Council to pass a legislation to appoint an Inspector General, because while the NYPD is watching our community, no one's watching the NYPD. Now this Inspector General, obviously we can't fix everything and it's not perfect, but basically what this Inspector General will do, they would be appointed and they would have oversight and accountability over the NYPD. And they'd be able to monitor, you know, the stop and frisk and documentation and the intelligence division, which right now, by the way, is closed off to everyone. And we also in the legislation say that this person would have a 7-year term, and why? Because we don't want them to have a marriage between the Inspector General, as the Commissioner right now is married to the mayoral candidate. So there would be no loyalty amongst those two positions. So you'll be hearing about that soon, and we hope that communities come together. We are working with Communities United for Police Reform, which is another coalition working on these issues, and have talked to many people across New York City. And we believe wholeheartedly that we have a real opportunity to come together and pass legislation that can help systemically change what's happening in the NYPD. Thank you.
And just on the federal level, Linda had mentioned that the DOJ guidelines create a complete loophole for them to do all this stuff. As long as they call it national security, then we can make all the noise we want to. We can call it racial profiling, we can call it anything. So there are two things that we're asking people to do. The first is to support the End Racial Profiling Act. This has been introduced by Congress since 1997. Since 1997 has been introducing it.
And what's the name of it again?
The End Racial Profiling Act. And it's going to force all the agencies to begin to keep information on who they're doing this to. so that we can finally begin to uncover it the way we did when the 250 forms began to get collected by the NYPD. The other part is that there's a letter sign-on campaign by the Rights Working Group, which is asking for organizations to sign on to a letter to Attorney General Holder calling on him to overturn the exception to the 203 racial profiling guidelines that allow its profiling to happen for national security. So if there's enough pressure, and anybody here went to Occupy DOJ on the 24th? I know Johanna was there. Give yourselves a hand for being down there. This was part of the demand of going down there and putting pressure on that agency to say, get rid of that national security exception, because right now they're using it for Muslims, but they're going to be targeting Black activists and Latino activists and Asian and indigenous activists under national security in a minute, and it'll swallow up the exception. So you can go to Rights Working Group, add your organization. They have over 175 so far, and their goal is to hit 200.
Okay, and so as we can see, this is an open-ended discussion because there's no resolution. We're at the beginning of the resolution of this. Slaveocracy is alive and well in the United States, and we can stop it, and that's it. So thank you to our panelists. Kung Lee, thank you very much. Corey Weiss, Raymond Santana, Yusef Salaam, King Downing, and Linda Sarsour. Thank you so very, very much for coming on this panel today.